media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome everyone to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government. Now, before this bureaucratic, oversized, self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we're pleased and honored to have a returning guest, Mr. Dinesh D'Sousa. He has a prominent career as a writer, a scholar, and a public intellectual. Unlike myself, by the way, he is also a renowned filmmaker. His latest film, which I saw twice actually, the second time was much better around the first time. I got more out of the second time than I did the first time. Hillary's America. Imagine the world without her. Oh, I'd love to. But which in my opinion helped her be defeated in the presidential election in 2016. We will be discussing his latest book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. Join us in this short podcast, by calling in. If you have a question, if we have time, we'll take your question. 646-652-4620. We look forward to hearing you. And here's the book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. Dinesh, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be on the show.
We cut off, I think you got your chin cut off. We got a lot of headroom. There you go. Now we can see the beauty of your face. You're all right. Okay, very good. Well, I have not read this book yet. I plan to. But exposing the Nazi roots of the American left, that's pretty hard hitting, How did you arrive at that subtitle?
Well, very often with a book, one already has an idea beforehand of where you want to go with it.
Yeah.
And with this book, I knew that there were some interesting and even chilling parallels between things that were going on the left in America and in the Democratic Party and things that were going on in Europe, in Italy, with Italian fascism in the 1920s, and even with early Nazism. So to take a single example, there's a close similarity between the Ku Klux Klan here in America and the Nazi brown shirts. Both organizations had about the same number of members. Notice that both organizations, people like to use ridiculous costumes. In both cases, they terrorize, they intimidate, they use violence on the street. In both cases, they pick on a racial minority. In one case, blacks, the other case, Jews. Right. And most significantly, both organizations are extensions of an official political party. In the case of the Klan, the Democratic Party. In the case of the Nazis, the Nazi Party. So I knew about the parallels. What I didn't know is the deep, intimate connections between the left over here and the left in Europe, and that's where the book really takes off.
Okay, I'd like you to get into that because I've never heard of that connection, learned of it, and so I'm intrigued as to how all these pieces fit together, and I'm certain many of our listeners feel the same way. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, so let's start with Hitler. It turns out that Hitler got 3 of his most destructive genocidal ideas from America, either from American progressives or from the Democratic Party. And I'm not kidding. Now, it's true that you don't hear about this. You don't see it in textbooks. You don't see it covered in the media. This is, by the way, why my book is titled The Big Lie, because the information I'm about to talk to you about is indisputable. It's right there in the historical record. It's not my opinion versus somebody else's opinion. There's no historian who will disagree with what I'm about to tell you now. It's just that it's not public. So let's start with the Nazis. Here they are in 1935. They're writing the Nuremberg Laws, the notorious laws that make Jews into second-class citizens. It segregates Jews into ghettos. Right. It forbids intermarriage between Jews and Germans, and later results in the confiscation of Jewish property. Now, The Nazis are very excited because they say we are creating the world's first racial or racist state. And then one of the Nazis kind of spoils the party. He goes, sorry, guys. He goes, but we can't do that because the Democrats in America have beaten us to the punch. They've already done it. Wow. He says in the Democratic South, the Democratic Party has segregation laws. They have anti-miscegenation laws. They have state-sponsored segregation. Everything we want to do to Jews, they have already done to blacks. So all we need to do is take their laws, cross out the word black, write in the word Jew, and we're off to the races. And so the point I'm trying to make is that not just that there were parallels or similarities, the Nazis actually sat around the table with the blueprints of democratic laws, and they used those as the basis for the notorious Nuremberg Laws that were the cornerstone of the Nazi regime.
Yeah, I know. I remember in your first book, Hillary's America, you talked about how the Democrat Party was actually the party of slavery, and the Republicans really were the party of freedom. But we twist history around, and we slowly changed that thinking over the decades to make people believe that the Republicans were the ones that were strict segregationists, and the Democrats were fighting for the freedom of the blacks, when the exact opposite historically was the truth. Am I correct in analyzing that?
Yes, you are. In 1860, the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. Think about that. There were 4 million slaves in the country. Every single one of them was owned by a Democrat. Now, I put that information in the movie, and the left has been thrashing around now for a year to find a single counterexample to that, and they haven't been able to do that.
That's interesting.
So the slavery debate was very clearly between the anti-slavery Republicans and the pro-slavery Democrats, a straight-out party division. Now, what's interesting today is the Democrats, it's a little too much to try to pin slavery on the Republicans, so they're trying to pin it on the South. And that's why they're rampaging through the South, pulling down all these Confederate monuments. By the way, all those Confederates that they're pulling down were Democrats. They don't say that. So it would be very honest to me if the Democratic Party said, look, we're the party of slavery and segregation and the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow, and we regret it, and we put up these monuments to famous Democrats, and we feel that today, in good conscience, we need to admit our history, apologize for it, move some of these monuments. That would be the honest way to go. But in fact, they're perpetrating the big lie, which is that they're not to blame. It all falls on the South.
You know, what I think is difficult for the average Joe Blow like myself is when you hear the connection between fascism and a political party, in this case the Democrats. It's difficult for me at least to understand that they consider themselves fascist. I mean, is there in fact a formal fascist movement that is actually called fascism? Do they actually use that term? Or is it just incidental that they are going along those same lines as they have before, but deny it? You know,
it's not like that. There were 3 collectivist movements in the early part of the century that all kind of developed at the same time. Progressivism, right. Communism, and fascism.
Right.
All on the same side of the aisle.
Right.
On the other side of the aisle, classical liberalism, limited government, individual rights. Now, what's interesting is that these 3 collectivist movements at the time all recognized their own kinship with each other. So right. Take FDR. FDR was an iconic progressive. He obviously wasn't a fascist, and he never called himself a fascist.
Right.
He had no sympathy for Adolf Hitler, but he was a big fan of Mussolini. He recognized Mussolini as being on the left. He knew that fascism was on the left. He saw fascism as more progressive than the New Deal. He thought they might have some good ideas that I don't have, so he sent members of his brain trust to fascist Rome to study Italian fascism, to bring it here, to bring ideas here. Now, Mussolini, for his part, admired FDR. He, too, recognized FDR as sort of representing a sister ideology. So Mussolini reviews FDR's book in an Italian magazine, and he concludes, it's very amusing to read now, he goes, basically, great book, this guy's one of us, he's a fascist. Now, after World War II, when fascism became irreparably stained with the reputation of Holocaust, all of this became deeply embarrassing to progressives who were coming to power in the academy, in the media, And so they covered it up. You won't find the FDR Mussolini connection in just about any high school or college textbook. But again, it's not disputed. There it is in the records of history. But after the war, it became part of the big lie to cover all this up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I've never heard before, discussing this with you, the tie of fascism with our presidents. I've heard the tie-in with socialism and our presidents and how they felt that we should be more of a socialist society rather than a free market society. But let me ask this. My definition, and when I say my definition, my perception maybe more so than my position, is that the definition of fascism was the merger of the military and the state. And I think that's a very narrow definition, I admit. And yet when you see what has been occurring over the past 50 years, it seems that the Republican Party has been as aggressive, if not more aggressive, in overseas conflict and in wars as the Democrats. And with my definition, obviously, being the merger of the military and state, would then that put some of the Republicans in the fascist territory, or are my definitions just all fallacious?
Yeah, your definition is I'm sorry to say, completely wrong. And what I mean by that is that, look, think of all the South American dictators who have used the military as an extension of the state, Idi Amin and so on. These are all tin pot dictators, but they're not fascist in the classical sense, because fascism, like communism, is a full-blown ideology. Right. Now, I admit that not a lot is known about fascism today, and I submit that the reason for that is that the left, after World War II, emptied fascism of all its ideological content. The core meaning of fascism is simply the all-powerful centralized state. And Mussolini, who founded the first fascist regime in the world in 1922, really 10 years before Hitler, Mussolini goes, everything in the state and nothing outside the state. So for Mussolini, the state is kind of like an organism, a living creature, and every individual is a cell within it. So there's no individual rights. There's no value to any cell by itself. The cell is only valuable to the degree it serves the state. That's fascism. Now, how fascism differs from communism is only in one small detail. Communism is international socialism, and fascism is national socialism. That was, of course, the name of Hitler's party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So, at its core, fascism is centralized government control of the economy and also of the lives of individuals. Yeah.
Where I'm having difficulty in separating all of this is that it seems today the Republicans really don't distinguish themselves enough from the Democrats, because you never hear them say things like free market, Constitution, Bill of Rights, less government interference, no foreign entanglements. So all those principles that made this country what it is and why people wanted to come here. I mean, they may talk about it on the periphery from time to time, but it's not a core value, it seems. And I don't follow politics because I disdain politics, so I run from it. So I plead ignorance. I'm not. You understand what I'm saying? And it bothers me. And let me give you just one example, and I'd love to hear what your opinion is. When we had a Democrat president, Barack Obama, the Republicans submitted to Barack Obama a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, just a repeal, which inferred that it would return the medical system start returning it back to the free market. And boy, was I a proponent of that. Man, I said, let's go for it, sign it. All right. When they got a Republican president, it became a repeal and replace Obamacare with, and I'll use the term Trump care, and I know not what that all means, but and so you never heard the word free market again once they had a Republican president, And so that concerns me. I was brought up in a very staunch conservative Republican household, and I'm very concerned about the Republican Party and them retreating from truly the conservative position that they should have taken and embraced the free market system within that. That's what really bothers me. Could you help me out with that?
Well, I think this is a case where you are right on the money. The Republican Party, you'd have to go back to the 80s and Reagan to see a full-blown articulation of conservative principles. Even with Trump, you don't get that. Trump is more of an instinctive guy, and I think many of his instincts are good, but he's not ideological. He doesn't spell out the principled basis of his positions. Unfortunately, the conservative intellectual movement is not a whole lot better these days. It's a mess. The reason this is worrisome is that when issues come up like Charlottesville, where the left creates a kind of narrative, a tableau, and a tableau that fits their predispositions. Hey, look, there's a neo-Nazi in a Trump hat. That proves that fascism is on the right. They're using these kinds of incidents to fortify the big lie, and conservatives then go silent or run for cover. A typical Republican is an invertebrate. He has no courage of his convictions. I think part of the reason for this is that Republicans are scared of the media. They believe that the media has the power to humiliate them, to destroy them, to make them into pariahs, and so they kowtow to the media. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was quicker to denounce Antifa than John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Paul Ryan.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, so I was just making the point that I think your instincts are right about that. Just shows you, even on Obamacare, I think the Republicans did not expect to win the presidential election. If they did, they could have gotten their act together and had a replacement or a partial repeal or whatever ready to go. Right. It's that they were stunned by the election result, and then they realized, look, although we have a narrow majority, it's only a narrow majority. If we do a conservative bill, we'll lose the moderates. If we do a moderate bill, we'll lose the conservatives. So Republicans need a few more seats in the midterm election of next year, I think, in order to be able to get a big legislative victory here.
Yeah. So this book is not saying, hey, look how bad the Democrats are, look how good the Republicans are. You're shifting some of the problems that we have with the Republican ideology as it is today, not as it was intended to be, but as it is today. Am I correct?
Yes, and in fact, you can find a parallel both with Mussolini and Hitler. When Mussolini and Hitler were coming to power, there were all kinds of people who didn't like Mussolini or Hitler, but tried to accommodate them, tried to make peace with them, tried to find a middle ground with them, and then realized to their dismay that those guys were just way too smart for them and way too tough for them, and ultimately these guys were overrun. So the Republicans who are trying to, in a sense, make peace with the left, I think ultimately are making a serious tactical mistake. They're only emboldening the left. Right. I mean, as long as these Antifa guys are successful at driving people off the campus, why would they stop doing what they're doing? It's working.
Yeah. By the way, I got a question from someone here in the studio. Are you going to make a movie out of this book, from this book?
Yes, definitely. Now, I have to say as a caveat that, a movie is very different than a book, and not all my books are sort of susceptible or lend themselves to be movies, because a book is ultimately an argument, but a movie is a story, and movies ultimately have an emotional basis, spine to the narrative. The good thing about this topic is it's very cinematic. There's fantastic footage available. It's also a very creepy topic, and so it lends itself to a very riveting, creepy movie, which will be coming out in theaters next summer.
Right. I want you to know I've never seen any movie twice except for yours.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Well, I am very, very troubled that we have lost in America that true free spirit. What happened in Charlottesville concerned me on many levels. One that's not talked about much is the fact that now we are taking down monuments, and this is reminiscent of what George Orwell talked about in his book 1984. You take all parts of history that may have some tarnishment of our past or misunderstood, and you just remove it. You don't discuss it, you remove it from history altogether. And it seems that we are now removing history, just like George Orwell predicted we would, by taking monuments down. By having, the president of the Confederacy is not saying, we are condoning the Confederacy, we should secede from the Union. It's part of history. You can't change history. It already happened. And do you see any parallels there as I see it?
Well, I do think that if we look around the world, who are the people who are destroying monuments? Well, ISIS is doing it in the Middle East.
Right.
The Taliban is doing it. They blew up the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan. And so, yes, I am sympathetic to this argument. But I want to point to an interesting wrinkle. Notice the monuments that are not coming down. Now, Robert Byrd was a senior member of Kleagle of the West Virginia Ku Klux Klan. And half of West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd. You drive up and down the highways, Robert Byrd Highway, Robert Byrd Medical Center, Robert Byrd School, Robert Byrd this and that.
Right.
Notice that there are no leftists who are defacing Robert Byrd statues. No one's pulling them down. No one's calling for renaming those schools. Now, in fact, Robert Byrd was lionized by Hillary as her mentor, and Bill Clinton and Obama were both at his funeral, and they delivered eulogies. So how is it that one gets to be a Ku Klux Klansman and immune from this sanitizing campaign of erasing our history? Or even George Soros, one of the big funders of the anti-fascist movement. George Soros has a very weird and dark past.
Yeah, right.
When he was a young man in his native Hungary, he was, along with a bunch of other guys, a kind of collection boy for Hitler, confiscating the property of Jews and turning it over to the Nazi regime. What's even more significant is when he was asked about this a few years ago by Steve Kroft of CBS News, he said he had no remorse, no regret. Mm-hmm. Now, by the way, if anyone in the Trump administration had this kind of history, I can only imagine the media apoplexy. There would be a media meltdown over this. Right. But again, because it's Soros, he gets sort of, you may say, media protection.
Yeah. Well, we're over. You've allotted us 15 minutes. We went 20 minutes, and I'm just enthralled. I can speak to you for hours, but I'll cut it short. I do have one more question for you. Do you consider yourself philosophically a libertarian?
I consider myself very close to that. I'm not a pure libertarian in the sense that I would probably assign to government certain functions, safety labels and things like that some the pure libertarians would dissent from. I also believe that a more consistent libertarianism is not an America that has sort of no active role in the world. I think it's a prudential decision when we use force on behalf of liberty. But with those qualifications aside, my politics would be very close to libertarianism, which is to say close to the classical liberalism of the American founding. To me, as a conservative, that's what we're trying to conserve.
Yeah. I really wish the conservative Republicans would feel the same way you do. It just seems that they're too close to K Street.
Yes, I do think that for a lot of these guys getting elected, being part of the system, this is one reason they're scared of Trump. They just fear that Trump is a bull in the china shop. He's going to overturn too many tables. It's going to upset their little the arrangements the cozy arrangements that get them elected time and time again. This is part of the explanation of the so-called deep state, which includes Republicans very uneasy with what Trump is up to.
Right. Well, Dinesh, I want to thank you so much for being on our program again. I do wish you all the luck in the world with your new book, The Big Lie. And also, I look forward to your movie. I will see it. I may even watch it twice again. And let me give you the last minute to sum things up and close out the program, please.
Well, the left is, it used to play the race card, and we took on the race card in the last movie, Hillary's America. The race card doesn't work that well for the left anymore. Too many people know the Democratic Party's own involvement in racism, slavery, segregation, and so on. So the left has now pivoted from the race card to the fascism card. Yeah. And it's not a total abandonment of the race card because the Nazis were racist. So it's a way of bringing the race card back inside the fascism card. I take it on in the new book. I blow it up. The movie will actually set these words to music. So I'd recommend checking out the book and then keeping an eye out for the movie next summer.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dinesh, and good luck to you. Appreciate you being on our show.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.